how do I read more and how do I read better? And the answers to that question are, well, in an era of infinite choice, the value of curation skyrockets. When you can get everything, your attention becomes the most precious resource. And valuing and preserving that is really critical, which is why we all tend towards influencers. Like we want to know what Ruben Chavez says because we trust you. Just like we want to know which book Oprah reads, right? Or Reese Witherspoon reads. Like we want that person's list because she's taking the endless infinity of everything. And she's saying, this month I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And so, like, of course, that becomes a bestseller for that month because everyone believes her.
I study the patterns of the universe.
Masters to the brain.
Virtual your mind. Talking about your life. Fundamental principles.
Philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Well, hello there once again. This is the Think Grow podcast. Welcome back. Glad to have you. And this is the place where personal development meets real life. I am your host, Ruben Chavez. I explore a variety of topics with thought leaders, creators, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, and all sorts of interesting people with the goal to bring you different perspectives you can use to enrich your mind and improve your life, really in whatever way you see fit. So today I'm talking with NEILYou Pasricha. Neil is a positive psychology researcher, and he's also the author of several books, including The Book of Awesome, The Happiness Equation, and his newest one, How to Get Back Up, a memoir of failure and resilience. Personally, I'm a really big fan of his book, The Happiness Equation, which kind of approaches happiness, at least in part, from an evolutionary perspective and takes into account our history as a species and kind of explains how happiness has really not been a priority in our brains ever. We've never even had the luxury or time to think about being happy until very, very recently. So it's a really cool take on the topic of happiness, and Neil is just a very clear and insightful writer and thinker. Neil is also a leadership keynote speaker, and he's spoken to hundreds of thousands of people across the world, including Fortune 100 companies, Ivy League schools. He's given talks to royal families in the Middle East, and so he's really bringing this global message of happiness to large numbers of people, which I love. And I thought it would be fun and extremely apropos to have Neil on the podcast because he has a podcast of his own centered around a subject that I am extremely fond of, which is books. It's called 3 Books with Neil Pasricha. And so we kind of nerd out about books in this episode when we talk about a time in his life when he didn't have the attention span for books and how he kind of overcame that. We also talk about what makes books different from other media like podcasts and videos and audio and things like that. He also reads a lot of fiction, and so we talk about why that is and kind of what his thoughts on fiction are. And then I share some of my thoughts on how I conceptualize personal development and ask him for his insights, and I think he has a lot of interesting things to say about that also. So if you are a book nerd, or if you want to read more, or if you just like listening to nerds talk about nerdy things, you will love this episode. And you'll also love Neil's podcast, which again is called 3 Books with Neil Pasricha. So I recommend checking that out too. But that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Here is Neil Pasricha. Neil, how you doing?
I'm great, Ruben. Thanks for having me.
Very cool. Of course. I'm excited to talk with you because thus far on this podcast, the Think Grow podcast, we haven't really spoken explicitly about kind of we haven't spoken about books. And ironically, that's where all this originated from, of course. And so you have a podcast explicitly about books. It's called 3 Books. And I love it. I've listened to several episodes over the past couple weeks. And And so anyway, I kind of want to get into that a little bit. You really nerd out on your on your podcast about books and everything relating to books. And so hopefully we can get into some of that here.
Oh, I'd love to. The they still are the greatest form of compressed knowledge we have anywhere in the universe. So there's nothing that communicates the amount of knowledge in such a small thing as a book can do. Not a movie, not a documentary. If you watch a movie of a book, you always think, well, the book's way better. They missed half the stuff because you can't communicate what you can in a book any other way.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm actually always astounded how inexpensive books are still. Like, it's ridiculous. The return on investment you get from books as compared to other forms of media is absurd.
And it's absolutely true. And like at the same time, if you ask the average person, how many books do you read, or like, and they usually say, 3 a year or 5 a year, whatever. And then you say, well, why don't you read more? They always tell you the same exact lie, which is, I don't have time. That's what they say. That's what everyone says. And so I was like, you know what? I want to answer this. You said I nerd out. Here you go. I looked into this. I actually looked into this. I'm like, how many words per day do people read now? Right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out that we have never read more words per day than today. Like, we have never, if you add up all your emails, yep, which the average person gets 150 a day. If you add up all the Instagram comments and the Twitter feeds and the newsreels and the text messages you're getting and the alert messages and the notifications and the blog posts you're checking, and if you add it all up, you are actually reading a 200-page book every day. You are.
Wow.
And yet you will lie to my face and tell me that you don't have time to read, when actually you've never read more. You've actually never read more. And that's just everybody. I'm being a bit tongue in cheek, but I'm talking about like the composite person that has no time for books but is spending their entire day reading garbage. So I'm saying, ditch 20 pages of the flotsam that is your email and your text messages and your alerts, and add 20 pages of fiction. Because according to the 2011 issue of Annual Review of Psychology, nothing else other than reading books, especially fiction, and this is a lot of people are like, well, I like nonfiction, fine. But fiction specifically, especially literary fiction, opens up your mirror neurons, the parts of your brain responsible for empathy, compassion, understanding. That's how you become a better human. You become a better leader. You become a better mom. You become a better dad. And the best quote I can give you on this subject is, actually, I stole this quote from Game of Thrones, which is, a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one.
I love that quote. Yeah, I love that quote.
And so the preposition I always start with is like, which 1,000 lives will you live? And then let's talk about that. And that's why my podcast is about uncovering over the next 15 years the 1,000 most formative books in the world. I am obsessed with this number 1,000. I wrote a blog called 1000awesomeThings.com. I have done the math and figured out that the average person lives for 1,000 months, and the average person is awake for 1,000 minutes a day. So to me, 1,000 is this like obsessive compulsive number I have in my brain at all times. Like I said, you're alive for 1,000 months, you're awake 1,000 minutes a day. Could you read 1,000 books over those 1,000 months that you're alive?
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. And what I love about your podcast is that, I mean, you've essentially curated. That's what you're in the process of curating, kind of the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the books that people personally recommend. And you've said before that what is it, like 500,000 books a year are published every single year, and so it's
that's just by the big publishers. That doesn't include the self-help industry, which is like, that would make it double.
Right. And so we're inundated with all these choices, but what you're doing with your podcast is essentially, you're getting that personal recommendation from a friend, because those are the books that really impact us, right? The ones we get from friends and not the ones that we are exposed to via the Amazon kind of automatic recommendation engine. And so that's what I love about your podcast, is that you're kind of curating these books for people. I think it's really funny. Your podcast is quite, I would say, quirky in the best possible way. Like, you have a definite end date, which you just alluded to for your podcast, which is, I think, September 31st.
Yeah, September 1st, 5:50. Yeah, September 1st to 5:52 a.m. 2031.
Right, and so that's funny. And you publish episodes in accordance with the full moon. I think I have that correct. On like all your titles are like alliterated, which is hilarious. And then the way you even set up your conversations, the way they come through the speakers is also really unique because you have one person coming in one speak. The guest comes in one speaker, and then you come in the other speaker, so you feel like you're in the middle of the conversation, which is very, very cool. So I just wanted to ask you right off the bat, like what led to some of these production decisions, and how did you approach that?
Different is better than better. That's the root of it all. It's that. Look, when I was 25 years old, I applied to Harvard Business School to do my MBA, and I had no chance of getting in. Are you kidding me? I never got I kind of did it as a joke. I already, to be honest with you, this is the funny thing. I accepted a local school already. I paid them a tuition deposit, like $1,000 to go to a local school near me. And I applied to Harvard. I was like, well, what's the downside? And I never thought I would get in because if you looked at my resume, I never got Dean's List. In my undergrad, lots of people got Dean's List, but not me. Right? I never got Dean's List. And then when they graduated, they went to fancy jobs. They were bankers or consultants or lawyers or whatever. I was running a franchise restaurant selling sandwiches in the suburbs. I wasn't even so that was what I was doing with my life. And I got in. And it was really weird because in the interview for Harvard, they were like, "What's up with this restaurant?" And I'm like, and I talk like I talk now. I'm like, well, we got the best customer service award in North America because we hand deliver all of our sandwiches. And you know what we do? And I literally could, because I was excited about it. I loved running the restaurant, and I never made any money, but I loved doing it. And they were like, that's really interesting. And they're like, what did you do before that? And I was like, oh, I was in New York. I was doing a comedy writing internship with a bunch of Simpsons guys in Brooklyn. I really wanted to be a comedy writer. Like, oh, what'd you do? And so they were puzzled by me. And then I got in, and I realized that different is better than better. They have a lot of people with perfect SAT scores and are valedictorians and have fancy jobs at big companies, but they don't have many weirdos. And so that adage has held good for me in my life. And so whenever I'm starting any new project, anything at all, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I try to remember that different is better and better. And I read an incredible book called Dataclysm. Dataclysm, Dataclysm, like cataclysm, but with data, written by Christian Rudder, Rudder. Christian Rudder is not a household name, but he is the founder of OkCupid. Okay, so one of the largest online kind of dating sites. And when everyone else is talking about big data, he's actually already studied it. He's a genius programmer, blah, blah, blah. So he looked at which women got the most likes or whatever on the dating site. And guess what? He also compared it to data on who was traditionally the most beautiful, based on the data, who was voted, who were the 10s. Well, the people that got the most likes and the most reach outs and the most inquiries, and I'm using all the wrong language here, but I'm trying my best here, Ruben, were the ones that were different, right? They were the ones with had a purple hairdo, had a really weird tattoo, happened to have because different was better than better. There was a smaller subset of the population maybe interested in them, but a larger number of them would reach out because it was something that was unique. And so why is my podcast so weird? Why do I publish on the lunar calendar? Well, I can argue for all those things. I'm like, well, the lunar calendar's 30,000 years old. The Gregorian calendar's bullshit. That's just 500 years old. And we don't even know how many days February has. Ask the average person how many days February has next year. They don't know. Because the calendar doesn't even work. And if you want to talk about when women have their menstrual cycles, when holidays are scheduled, this thing, the moon, where the clock is in the sky, people, look up, so that's the best clock there ever is. And I think changing from that clock was really stupid of us. So I have a fun argument for all of them, and they're all a bit tongue in cheek, but the point of the whole thing is that I really believe, and this is partly why I think you're so successful, different is better than better. If you're doing something no one else is doing, then you're in a world of your own.
Yeah. I really like that philosophy. And I want to kind of jump right into the books, but before we do that, I kind of want to give our listeners a little bit of a taste for kind of what sets you on this path. Because, I mean, you've already given us a taste of what it is that you do, but, you know, you've written a book that I love, The Happiness Equation. You also written a book called The Book of Awesome. What kind of, like, did you set out to be a positive psychology author, or kind of can you walk us through what led you to
No.
that?
Well, it's like, honestly, my wife left me and my best friend took his own life, and I was living downtown. Never lived downtown before. I was in a bachelor apartment, never lived alone before. I lost 40 pounds due to stress. I wasn't sleeping. People at work come up to me in the hallway and they were like, "Man, you look awesome. What is this, keto?" Like, they, people don't
Yeah.
understand that you lose weight when you're totally stressed. And I was like, man, like, I got to cheer myself up. So I started a blog called 1000awesomethings.com. I hinted earlier that I was obsessed with this number 1,000. And so I didn't really do it with much thought, but I started a blog called 1000awesomethings.com to cheer myself up. And for the next 1,000 straight weekdays, I wrote an essay about something that cheered me up. Like, when a friend invites you under their umbrella when it's raining, peeling an orange in one long peel without it breaking, playing on old dangerous playground equipment, flipping to the cold side of the pillow in the middle
Smacking
of the night.
electronics to make
So
them
I wrote
work.
these essays. You got it, brother. And so anyway, different is better than better. Not many people were writing a weird blog like that. And so the International Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences awarded it Best Blog in the World 2 years in a row. When that happened, 10 publishers, or 10 literary agents, actually, not publishers, approached me. And that turned into the Book of Awesome, 3 sequels, 2 journals, 5 calendars, an app, and a kid's book. It's like the Krusty the Clown imitation gruel. 9 out of 10 orphans can't tell the difference. I literally was like, man, I have like 12 products here with the word off, but it just came from, literally, it was all just like a file print staple of elements of my blog that were just put into book form.
That's so cool.
That's how so then I give a so then you're like, well, I'm still not a positive psychology researcher, but then I give a TED talk about it. The TED talk goes viral. It goes on TED.com, blah, blah, blah. And then people started approaching me to speak and all this stuff. And Meredith Vieira on the Today Show, like she like, I'm on the Today Show. She looks me in the eye. She's like, "So Neil, how do you teach all of America how to be happy?" And I was like, "Oh shit! Like, I don't even know how to be like, I'm depressed. I'm going through a divorce." But the cool thing about that question was, it made me realize that I was probably going to be asked it for a long time. And because I'm East Indian and my parents always gave me like extra homework, I like decided to like try to study that and like actually try to figure it out. So I'm not the genius academic like locked up in some ivory tower that's like studying happiness in labs. That's not me. All I do is read all that stuff and try to distill and simplify and write about it in ways that people can actually apply it in their life. So I'm not and I don't want to pretend that I'm that person doing lab work all the time. I'm not. What I try to do is read it all, come up with my own perspective, and then put it out in things like The Happiness Equation, the book you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because your journey parallels mine a bit, because Think, Grow, Prosper just started as a very simple Instagram account. And the reason I started that Instagram account was for nobody but myself. And the reason was because I wanted to kind of inspire myself during a really hard time in my life. I my girlfriend at the time, wife now, her mother had died, and I'd lost my job. Like, we were running real low on funds, and so I was just kind of reading. My default is reading. I'll read kind of inspirational book, or I've always kind of gravitated toward personal development, that genre. And so I just documented that for myself. Like, I wanted to remember these concepts. I wanted to remember some of these principles that I thought were transformative. And I documented those kind of little by little, and just so I could remember them. And then people started kind of paying attention, and it started getting shared, and then went viral and blew up. And now we have the blog and the podcast and everything. So I think that's a really
no big deal. 3 million people read it every day.
I think it's a really interesting principle, like to notice. It's like, do something for yourself, right? Like do it for yourself. You should be your first audience member and your first fan. So I think you were with the 1,000 Awesome Things blog. So that's an interesting thing to realize.
Nothing could be more truthful than what you just said. Do it for you. Because we know from the research that only intrinsic motivators actually work. Extrinsic motivators distract. So if you were really doing it for the hit count, the thing would have sucked, right? Like if you just were just trying to growth hack hits, well, you could have done that, but your thing would suck. So with the 1,000 books that my podcast is 3 books, I actually legitimately want to read them. Like I'm interviewing Ryan Holiday this weekend. So like I'm reading all week. All I'm doing all week is like reading his 3 most formative books to prepare for that interview. He's given me them. They're surprising. They're things I haven't read before. So all I'm doing all week is reading them, writing questions, and then I get to talk to the guy. And at the end of 15 years, hopefully I'll have done that with 333 people, and then I'll have 1,000 books. And that's the whole point, is that if I like it, then maybe other people will like it. But you can't think of it the other way. You can't think, some entrepreneurs would say, well, find a problem in the market and you can solve it. Fine. But actually, it's more like find a problem for yourself.
That's what I found too. It's like when you approach it from that angle, it's much more authentic and it's just more powerful. I think there's more power behind your actions. I wanted to ask you, because I was listening to I think it was the initial episode that you did for your podcast with your wife. And it's funny because the initial episode I did for my podcast was also with my wife. And we just started talking, and it was really me working out my idea for the podcast. And when I heard your episode, yours was very similar. And I was just laughing to her. And I was like, man, Neil did a very similar episode that we did. And I hadn't heard yours until just a few days ago. But in that episode, there was a part where you talk with her about there was a time in your life when books, you just didn't have the attention span for books. You thought they were boring and dull. Can you comment on that time in your life and kind of what led to that, and also how you kind of got out of that slump? Because obviously now you're not only a reader of books, but a writer of books.
Thank you for asking, because I feel like this is I feel like it's one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. So when I was a kid, like most kids, I loved books. And when I say most kids, I mean walk into any child's bedroom and look at their books. They have a ton. That's what those are the first gifts. They're given Goodnight Moon and Pat the Bunny, and people read to them before bed every night for years. So don't give me this schmizzle smazzle about addicted to technology. The first thing we do with kids for the first couple of years of their life is really read to them every night. So kids love them. It's this intimacy with their parents. It's a special time of the day. It's falling into a unique story, all age appropriate. So it's like, I loved books, and I don't think I'm the only one. I think most kids do at a very young age. So then and when I was a kid, also there was like no internet, so it also helped that there wasn't like a ton of other options. So I'm just saying, like, of course I got Saturday morning cartoons, but it's like books were kind of also a thing. Late at night in bed, I could not distract myself with Angry Birds. It was not possible, right? There was no cell phones, so I loved books. I loved them, and I loved them so much that I was the editor of my elementary school newspaper. I founded it, and it was Portable 6 Press, and then I helped found my high school newspaper, and I was the editor of that, and then I went to university, and I was the editor of my university newspaper, and somewhere in there I lost it. I think it was like I'm reading all these textbooks for school. They suck, or at least they're not interesting to me, or I wouldn't have picked them. Like accounting, like I'm reading a whole book about accounting, right? And but yet it occupies all my reading time, so I can't read other things, and I wasn't strong enough or confident enough to like just not read the school stuff and read my own stuff, which maybe what I should have done, like autodidact. So I didn't do that. So I'm like, somehow I kind of ended university, and actually I was exhausted by reading, and then reading became kind of distasteful to me. And by now, of course, the internet is here, and cell phones are here, and the world has changed, and everything's a distraction device. And I found that books were slow. They were boring. They required more of me, and my brain was unwilling to give them that. And I did not appreciate at that time what difference a book could give me in terms of emotional growth, vocabulary development, business insight, how, as you said, cheap they are for what you get. And so I was like, I had like 10 books. And like when I met Leslie, who's the woman I started to date, a couple years after my divorce, And she came over to my house. She's like, "Where's all your books?" I'm like, "Oh, I got like these 10 books from when I was a kid." She's like, "Where's all the books you read?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't have time to read. I'm just too busy writing my blog and working full time. Like I also had a full time job at Walmart. Like I'm just coming home and blogging, and now I'm writing the Book of Awesome, blah blah blah. So I don't have time." And she's like, "Oh my god, like this is so stupid. Like you heard this in chapter 1 of my podcast." She's like, "How can you be an author who doesn't read? Are you kidding me?" And you're like a bald barber.
She called you out.
And she called me out. I was like, "Yeah, I guess I should get back into it, you know?" And so I was like, well, over the next few years, Ruben, I made some systemic changes in my life. They were subtle, they were small, they were sometimes purposeful, they were often not. I moved the TV to the basement. I put a bookshelf out my front door. I canceled my 2 newspaper subscriptions to like put more mind share into reading. I decided to make a public commitment, I copied Ryan Holiday, and with his permission, I just decided to like start an email list telling people what books I read every month. Which started with no readers and then it's grown into like 30,000. Which is small compared to the stuff you've got going, but like for me, that's like 30,000 people. I sent one out last night. 30,000 people read every month. Just a list of books I've read each month.
That's awesome.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so when I started doing that, the most common question I got was the same one I had 5 years earlier, which was, where'd you have all this time to read? And so I answered that question in an article I literally wrote on an airplane called 8 Ways to Read a Lot More Books. I sent it into Harvard Business Review. To my surprise and delight, they printed it. And to my additional surprise and delight, it became the most popular article on all of Harvard Business Review's website for like 6 months straight.
Wow.
Yeah, and this week alone, they said that they're going to out publish it in like this Harvard Business Review book on like how the best articles on how to manage yourself or something. So you can link to it in like your show notes or whatever. This article like completely went viral. It was like the most popular article. To this day, if you go to like Google and you type in like how to read more books, it's like one of the top 1 or 2 hits. Like it's the first thing that comes up, right? Or like one of the top couple. And so that made me realize something else, which is that this problem I was touching with my finger just briefly with this article was actually a problem that really was not just huge for me in my past life 5 years ago, but also a tremendous problem most people have, which means if you ask the average person, would you like to read more? 99% of them say yes. And if you say, well, what do you want to read? They say books. Like they know what they need to do. They just don't do it. And they don't have a way to do it, which is why this article was insightful for them. I've actually since written a follow-up for that article and started a freaking podcast all about essentially that article, which is how do I read more and how do I read better? And the answers to that question are, well, in an era of infinite choice, the value of curation skyrockets. When you can get everything, your attention becomes the most precious resource. And valuing and preserving that is really critical, which is why we all tend towards influencers. Like we want to know what Ruben Chavez says because we trust you. Just like we want to know which book Oprah reads, right? Or Reese Witherspoon reads. Like we want that person's list because she's taking the endless infinity of everything. Literally, Amazon has 200 million books on it. And she's saying, this month, I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And so, like, of course, that becomes a bestseller for that month because everyone believes her. And so I didn't think I was smart enough to tell people what books to read. Like, I'm like, well, who am I? Like, there's actually already books in bookstores that are like 1,000 books to read before you die. But I'm like, my reaction is like, who's that guy? Like, why should I believe him? And so what I'm trying to do is find the 333 most inspiring and also most diverse people I can find to teach me which 1,000 books I should read.
I really have to check out that article. What's the title of the article again in Harvard Business Review?
8 ways to read a lot more books.
8 ways.
When it came out, it came out February 3rd, 2017, and the original title was 8 ways to read a lot more books in 2017. And like the night before it came out, I emailed the editor and I was like, do you want to change 2017 to this year? She writes back, why? I was like, well, just in case people read this article like past 2017, you know? And so she's like, oh, good idea. So it's called 8 Ways to Read a Lot More Book This Year. And you can read the article in any year and it will still apply to you.
That's a good idea. I just found the article here on my phone and it's a meaty one. So I'm excited to link to that. That brings up something for me that I wanted to ask you. Like, how I haven't read the article obviously yet, but so this may be in the article. But approaching it from, say, a more technical standpoint, like, how do you read a book? Like, because I know there's people who like literally read every single word,
Yeah.
and then there's people who just digest a book. In fact, I was reading on Harvard Business Review, I think there was this article that was like how to read a book or how to digest a book more quickly, and the person who wrote the article, he was relating an experience he had in college where his class was complaining to the professor that they didn't have time to read all the assigned books, and the professor was like, well, you're not reading them word for word, are you? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, well, this is nonfiction. Here's how you read nonfiction. And then the article is basically, well, here's how you get you suck the main idea from this nonfiction book. And obviously fiction is different, but how do you go about reading a book? What's your method?
So I think all that stuff about like how to sort of use a syringe to inject this information directly into your brain really fast, I think that world is a little bit of bullshit. I do. I think it's about doing two things. Okay, these two things are more important than speed reading, which is number one, making more time for it. And so you'll see lots of things I did in that article, but like simple things like moving the TV to the basement, bookshelf at the front door. I always have a book in my backpack, always have a book in my backpack, always have I can't go anywhere without having something to read beside me. Like we always have our phone in our pocket. Isn't it fair that books should also be
Right.
with us? So things like that. It's just like making more time for it, prioritizing. I have a red camping light I wear on my head. After my wife falls asleep, I literally press this red light because it's like red light's supposed to be doesn't keep you
Yeah,
awake as
yeah.
much as white lights. And then I read for like an hour before I fall asleep. I read till I fall asleep. Like that's making time for it. And the other thing, remember I said there's two things. The other thing is quit more to read more.
Yeah.
And so most of us were taught how to read poorly. We were taught how to read. And so I guess I agree with one element of the old professor. We were taught to read like front to back. We were taught to read like a book to finish the book report. And if you used Cliff Notes or whatever, you were cheating, right? Like if you read the book summary, you kind of just cheated. But actually, I say don't worry about getting to the end. Just quit. Like just throw it away. And if a book cannot hold your attention, then it's not worthy of your time. And like I said, even if you read one book every month you're alive, and that assumes you can read from, age 0, which is a big assumption, then you still only have 1,000 of them. So whenever you throw one away, you shouldn't think, oh, I'm a quitter. I failed. I couldn't get through it. It was really hard for me. No. Don't think that. Just think, phew, now I'm actually making space for something that's super valuable and important that I'm going to like resonate with. So that's how you should think about it. Quit more to read more. And I probably quit 3 or 4 books for every book I finish.
That's really useful. And that's actually something that I've had trouble doing and only recently have been implementing because it's interesting. We have no problem abandoning a social media post or a blog post if it's not interesting, but we feel like, at least I do, like we have to finish the entire book. Like we have to power through it. But I think that's really useful to be able to let go of something that's not holding your interest. And of course you learn better when you're actually interested in what it is that you're learning, right? When it's actually solving a problem in your life.
Well, exactly. And, the Book of Awesome, my first book, I remember when I wrote it, I told you I did not read. I was super stressed. I was going through a divorce. I just lost a friend. I was working a full-time job. So if you read the Book of Awesome, my first book, all it is like the other side of the pillow. And then I write about it for like 500 words. Then you flip. And so I wrote it that way because I had very, very low attention span and very, very low like ability to go deep or focus. That was very hard for me. So I wrote what I could handle. The side benefit of doing it that way is like, the parents of 9-year-old boys will tell me that like my little boy can't like he's addicted to video games. Like he can't read a whole book, but he likes the Book of Awesome. And or like it's a great book for my toilet. Like I take all that stuff as compliments because we just need, when you go from the world we live in today, which is so shallow skimming and so, again, fish hooks in your eyeballs all day. Like I'm looking out the window right now where I am, and it's like I see ads everywhere on the sides of people's bodies, on the sides of people's cars, on the sides of park benches, on the sides of bus shelters. For me, the transition from the world that we currently live in to the world of books is a bit of a crash landing. Like don't just pick up like East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Like don't just go there. Don't go to Infinite Jest. You're going to just get that you won't be able to handle it. Your brain is not able to focus on it. So start with Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein, right? Like start with a book of kids' poems, or start with our, a Judy Blume book, like something that you remembered reading when you were a little kid, right? Just ease back into it. And then when you're like, oh yeah, even graphic novels, comic books, whatever. Once you get back, then work your way up to where then, because the stuff that's thicker and longer and has more depth and has more whatever. Mark Manson, who's the author of Subtle Art of Not Giving. I don't know if you can swear or not. So Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He always says the reason big books are the best is because they got through all the editors. And they got made. So if you want to know a great book, he's like, honestly, War and Peace is a fantastic book. He's like, Infinite Jest is a fantastic book. Atlas, he goes on and on because he's like, it got through all the people that were supposed to shorten it. And what you have left is an incredibly deep, rich, intellectual, and emotionally satisfying journey that you would never get anywhere else.
Yeah. On this show, I tend to focus on the mental and emotional aspects of living well. And while those are important, your physical health is just as important. You can't think, grow, or prosper to the fullest unless you have your health in check. And Four Sigmatic products have really helped me with this part of my life. There are very few companies whose products I recommend without reservation. Four Sigmatic is definitely one of them, though. I've been using their superfood supplements for years, long before they became a sponsor of this podcast. Four Sigmatic is a really unique and thoughtful company. They specialize in mushroom-based drinks that promote immunity, energy, longevity, and just generally help us live all-around healthier lives. As far as what I recommend, they make a wide variety of different blends, but there's two that I'll recommend to you. The first is their Coffee with Cordyceps blend. Cordyceps is a medicinal mushroom, and it's been shown to support energy, stamina, and athletic performance. So it's perfect before a workout, or during a study session, or really just any time you need some extra focus. And all their coffee is made from 100% organic Arabica beans, and yes, it actually tastes like coffee, not anything like mushrooms, in case you're worried. The second product I'll recommend to you is probably my favorite supplement that I've taken in a very long time. It's not a coffee blend, it's actually a blend of 10 different and very well-researched adaptogenic herbs. Okay, what are adaptogenic herbs? Well, in a nutshell, they are basically plants that have been traditionally consumed, often for thousands of years, to help people adapt to various forms of stress. They help minimize fatigue, promote focus, and just increase overall well-being. So I've been mixing this into my morning smoothies for a while now, and I've literally been amazed by how balanced it makes me feel. Cognitively, I'm sharper. I can work for longer periods of time, and I just generally have more energy, and not the sugary energy drink kind of energy. I'm talking about like actual foundational, stable energy that comes from my body just working better and being healthier. And here's the great news. As a listener of the Think Grow podcast, you can get 15% off any Four Sigmatic purchase by going to foursigmatic.com/TGP. They've also been kind enough to set up a discount code for you guys. So just type in the letters TGP at checkout and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, the URL you want to visit for the discount is foursigmatic.com/TGP, as in Think, Grow, Prosper, or just use the discount code TGP at checkout and get 15% off your order. And now, back to the show. What makes books so different from other media? Like, because I think people would, especially younger people, probably would argue that, and I've heard this before, it's like, oh, well, why would I read a book when I can just listen to a podcast, or when I could listen to a lecture on the same topic, or when I can, read a punchy article that will give me the same information. Like, what is it? Because I mean, I'm like you, man. I'm with you. I am a believer in books. They've helped me had major mindset shifts, and I feel like I get into a space when I'm reading that's different from other media. And maybe that's the answer, but I'm curious what you think. Why are books different from other forms of media?
They are different in lots of ways, and it's a great question. It's a great challenge, and I have lots of data on this too. By the way, just so you know, of all media right now, and I'm talking film, I'm talking television, I'm talking art, I'm talking music, only books have the percentage of analog consumption increasing.
Wow, that's amazing.
So what I'm saying is even the people that went to e-readers are kind of coming back. And maybe it's just because we're exhausted with screens, but like there's something about a real book, the crack of the spine, the size of the print, the way they design the jacket, what they're really trying, that you go somewhere else. Okay. So, now to answer your question, which is like, why are books worth of this? I would just ask back to the person asking this. Well, what do you want to? What's your goal in life? Like, what are you trying to just like know the most stuff? Well, if that's your goal, if you're trying to learn the most stuff about like, say how like I don't know how video games are developed and designed. I don't know. I made something up. Well, you're probably right. You could watch 10 YouTube videos and maybe go watch a documentary and listen to a couple podcasts and you're there. Cool. You win. But if your goal is to be, and I'm being a bit preachy here. I don't usually go this route, but I'm going to go here now because I care about books so much. If your goal is to be a good human being, to be an incredible dad, to be the world's best sister and mother and daughter, if your goal is to be a great leader, to have people who are underneath you in the company love working for you, if your goal is to be an incredible citizen, to be a rich part of the community, to be an incredible neighbor, to be somebody that people trust, if it's to be someone who at your deathbed, people surround you and they say, you've changed and affected my life in so many positive ways, your funeral is overflowing, and everybody says, that person lived a great life. If that's your goal, nothing else is going to get you there other than books, because only books will give you, like, how, if I'm empathetic, like I grew up with wanting for nothing, right? Like my parents were immigrants to Canada and they gave me a great life. I won the parent lottery, as Seth Godin would say. I won the parent lottery. So I had it pretty easy. But if I'm going to actually learn compassion, empathy, understanding for people who have totally and wholly different experiences than me, I can't just learn it by walking by a homeless guy. I have to be a homeless person. I have to read How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. I have to read by Mohsen Hamid. I have to read, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I have to read books that take me into the hearts and the minds and the souls and the emotions and the footsteps of entirely wholly different people in their lives that I essentially, like the Game of Thrones quote says, I essentially live by being there for 50 or 100 hours in their heads with them through essentially a person who's pulled off an incredible magic trick, which I personally cannot do, which is you lose track of who the author is and suddenly you're somewhere else. You've disappeared. You're in a different reality. And they've done brain scans, like MRIs on people the day after they've read literary fiction or even fiction, and like the vocabulary and the like all these elements of our brains that we don't normally associate with reading are totally lit up the day after, including language areas. Like when you read about cinnamon and you read about soap, you're opening up your smell centers. You don't do that when you watch a documentary. And the reason is because in a book, you're the director. You come up with the story. You picture the room. You picture the wardrobe.
It's
you
more
picture the
active.
costume. You picture the actor. It's totally active. If you watch a movie, someone else did all that work. Someone else was the director. Someone else picked out what the room looks like. That's why I hate the fact that I can't read Harry Potter without picturing Daniel Radcliffe because there's so many billboards. I've stayed away from the movies because I like the book so much. I've stayed away from, but I can't help but picture because someone else picked what he looked like, but I didn't have that picture in my head, right? So that's the thing that books give you, and I'm saying if your goal is to live a rich and whole and purposeful and deeply leadership-oriented existence, to think and to grow and to prosper, I don't believe anything else can give you that richness that cumulative sum of experiences, emotional depth that a book can give you.
That's really interesting. Do you read more fiction or nonfiction?
My percentage of fiction I'm noticing increases every year. I was like, I used to, like when I started into this, I was like 100% nonfiction. I was like, oh, I got to like catch up. Now I got to read like, the Malcolm Gladwell. I got to read, like, there's all this stuff that's like kind of mandatory, like I'm like, how have I never read The Tipping Point? Right. So I had to catch up. And then the deeper I go into it, I'm like, I throw a piece of fiction in and I'm like, whoa, that one shook me.
Yeah.
Like East of Eden by John Steinbeck is a great example. Like I would never pick up that book. John Steinbeck, who's he? Like East of Eden, that's 700 pages. Like forget it. But what happened to me, Ruben, was I was at a bar late at night. I started talking to someone about books because I'm obsessed with them, as you can tell. And I'm like, what's your favorite book? This is before my podcast. I have better questions now. And he's like, check this out. He pulls down his like top of his shirt collar and like on his chest and like essentially his neck, he has like a huge tree branch like tattooed on his body. And I was like, what the hell's that? And he's like, it's the cover of East of Eden. He's like, I got it tattooed on my body because it totally affected me. I was like, East of Eden, what's that? And then the bartender at the bar that same night was like, oh my God. She's like, look at this. And she pulls up her arm and she has a quote from East of Eden on her arm.
Wow.
And so these people, I presumably went off and got married, but I'm just kidding. But I was like, if two people that I don't know, two total strangers, have the same book tattooed on their body, I mean, come on, I got to read that book. So I live in downtown Toronto. There's 3 bookstores open until midnight every night in my neighborhood that I can walk to. I'm like totally lucky. So I go that night till the bookstore open till midnight, and I buy East of Eden that night. And I start reading it, and it was my favorite book of the year in 2017.
Wow, that's very...
And you have to read it.
Yeah, well, now I have to read it, of course, and maybe even get a tattoo of it on my arm. I'm not sure.
To be determined.
I really like your answer for why read books. And it's basically to become a better person. Obviously, you put it more eloquently, but it's not just about knowledge; it's about becoming a better person. And that leads me to something that I've wanted to ask you, and I've been kind of trying to work this out with different people because it's something that is interesting to me. It's like that answer kind of indicates that all books are kind of personal development, like regardless of what category it is, it's all this nebulous kind of category of personal development / self-help, whatever you want to call it. I guess one part of this question is like, I've had a little bit of trouble conceptualizing, I would say, personal development. Like, what is it? And you're a positive psychology author, you're a self-help author, so I'd like to get your take on that. But I'd also like to get your take on the idea that, like, is everything personal development? Because fiction, we know that we learn, like you said, we learn better from fiction. We're meant to follow stories. Like, that's what we pay attention to. We follow stories and we absorb them more because that's the structure of our lives, essentially. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on those ideas?
I have a new book that just came out from Audible Originals. Okay, it's called How to Get Back Up. A memoir of failure and resilience. And when I wrote it and I submitted it to them and blah, 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 they're like, memoir is our biggest category. I was like, really, memoir? I was like, I thought it would be self-help because that's the biggest category in a bookstore. Like, that's the most popular, that's the highest sales category in a bookstore is self-help. It's usually tied between self-help and actually business. Okay. By the way, out of curiosity, humor is the worst. Humor is the lowest is the lowest sales category, which is so funny because I think many books are towing the line between those two. You know what I mean? Like, so as David Sedaris says, you don't want to be next to the Kathy cartoons. That's what he always says. With a massive apologies to Kathy, which I think is a great comic strip. But the point is, when they said that to me, I was like, well, that's weird. Memoir? And the Audible people said to me, oh, well, memoir is the new self-help. Actually, people don't want to be preached to anymore. They don't want to be like told what to do, like how to save time, do these 7 things, like throw your watch in the trash. But people don't want that stuff. What they want is the story of an incredible, like, say, Finding Ultra, which is a great memoir by Rich Roll. This is guy's like personal story of like becoming an alcoholic after his wife left him at kind of like the altar, and turning that total low point in his life into like becoming one of the world's fittest men and like an ultra marathon athlete. This is true, and of course it's a true story, and he's an incredible writer, and he actually wrote the book himself, like unlike a lot of books these days. So I read that book and I'm like, whoa, no wonder that this is the new self-help, because it's actually like you get into someone's head and you can learn what they learned as they learned it, right? And then I'm like, to your point, it's like, but it's not just there. It's what are we on the planet to do? Like, why are we here? If it obviously no one knows, and you can believe in religion, or you can believe in science, or you can believe in both, or you can believe in it's about friends, or it's about connection, or it's about impact, or it's about legacy. Go on millions of paths. Fine. But no matter what path you're on, I don't think there's a book you can read that wouldn't help you go down that path. It wouldn't help you grow into a better version of yourself. And that could be the Amazing Spider-Man comic books. It doesn't matter. The point is, we're so obsessed these days with looking out of our own eyes at the world and how we can be bigger in it, but we're not doing enough of looking backwards into our own minds and figuring out how we can grow and develop that. And anything you read, from a book about the history of shelters to a book like East of Eden to a book like the Book of Awesome, or to a book like a Judy Blume book, it grows your capacity to understand versions of the lives that we are living for tiny, short, fleeting moments, and therefore help you live a richer version of your own.
I love that. I love that. That's kind of how I've come to conceptualize the term, the field, the genre, personal development. It's like basically anything that helps us understand ourselves better and understand the world better, because that's essentially the two categories of things, your internal world and the external world. And anything that helps us do that is essentially personal development, right? Like I can't think of, and obviously that's a very encompassing definition, but like it's just I've always found it funny when people kind of scoff at like the self-help section. I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes oh my God, self-help, like of
course.
But it's like, and then you look at whatever they're reading or whatever they're consuming, and it's like they're consuming it in order to understand themselves better or the world better. They just, whether it's a fiction novel, a great classic American novel, or whatever it is, they're doing it for the same purpose. It's just that they're not framing it in the same way. And I think that's so funny.
Our brains are hardwired to learn, right? Like, so when I give a speech, I always think of the 3 E's, which are entertainment, education, and empowerment. Entertainment gets you in the door. It's what makes people turn up from their cell phones and look at the stage. Entertainment is the currency that makes people's learning centers open and makes them give you their attention for an hour, okay? The next thing is education. The thing we want the most is education. Every single person listening to this right now is craving education. People that follow your podcast, people that follow my podcast, people that follow your Instagram, people that follow they're looking to learn, right? That's all we all want to do. That's why we're having this conversation. You're learning from it. I'm learning from it. We're hardwired to learn. And when our formal education stops, lots of people, including myself, as I told you earlier, don't know how to start it up again. Like, I was told how to learn for like 20 years. So when it stopped, I was like, now what? So but yet my body was growing some sort of like invisible tumor that I wasn't getting it anywhere, right? Like I couldn't feel that. I could feel that there was festering inside me. So learning is very enriching. And then empowerment's my last one, because ultimately what people really want to be able to do is do it by themselves. They don't really care about you or me. They don't. And I don't care about, what they really care about is, could I do this in my family? Could this make my children's lives better? And I love that. The best compliment I can ever get after a speech is, no idea who that guy was or is, but I'm going to do this thing he said. Like that to me is empowerment. Because if you talk about how you climb Mount Everest, they're not going to do that. They're just going to think you're awesome and they're not. So I'd rather they think you're not and they are, if I had to choose.
That makes sense. So this brings me to kind of, I'm being conscious of time here because I know we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to ask you, I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask you this, but I'm very curious because I couldn't find where you said it on the podcast. I don't think you have. And knowing you're probably saving it for some special moment. But if I can ask you, what are your 3 most formative books, the books that have impacted you the most, that have made you who you are, that have shifted your thinking?
You're right. I'm saving it for a very special moment, but I'll give you one of them. I'll give you one of them. And the reason I'm saving it is just because, to be honest with you, I'm like forever thinking
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Like that. It's like I wrote 1,000 awesome things on my website, right? That was 2008 to 2012. That was a 4-year long blog where I wrote every single weekday, without missing a post. And about 2 years into it, I realized what I wanted my last blog post to be. And everyone was asking me, what's the number one? What's number one going to be? And I didn't tell them. And it's a good thing I didn't, because I changed it 6 months later. And then everyone was asking me. And then I wouldn't tell them. And then 6 months later, I changed it again. And then for the last year of the blog, I like actually knew what it was and it didn't change. And I knew that if I held on to it for a year and it didn't change, it was the right post. And so I finished my blog with that post, which you're probably curious what
I
that
am
is
curious
now.
what that is.
Should I tell you, or should I let you go check? I'll let you go check if you want.
We'll put that on the show notes.
Okay. Number one thing on my blog. By the way, I announced it live on national TV.
Really?
Like I announced it live on, with like 500 people in the audience at a bookstore on national television, which is Canada. So 12 people watching. But still national television, because it got to be like, what's this guy's number one thing going to be? And so for me, I'm going to save the 3 books, but I'll tell you one of them. One of them is The Babysitter's Club Treasuries, which is really weird. But my sister would read these books called The Babysitter's Club. You may have heard of them. They sold like 300 million copies. And, it was like Christie's Great Idea, written by Christie. Marianne's Day Off, or whatever, written by Marianne. And Claudia Gets a Haircut by Claudia. And then there's these treasuries, like once every 5 or 10 books. It was like, they all go to Disney World. And I remember like borrowing this off my sister's shelf and reading it. Because as I was a kid, I loved reading and I would read everything. And every single chapter of that book was written by a different person. It was like Christie's version of getting on the Disney cruise, then Marianne's version, and it goes a little further. And then she goes to the buffet. And then like Claudia's version, she goes to the buffet. And then she also goes to so I was like, this is one author writing one book under the guise of multiple voices with stories that intertwist in a lot. And I could still remember thinking like, wow, to actually subvert your own identity so that you can be multiple people in a voice that shows a same story from multiple angles. That's incredibly talent, but also incredibly rich as a reader. So I've always held on to that idea that narrative voice is something you can learn. It's something you can change. It's something you can control. And so if you read my books, like if you read the Book of Awesome and then you read the Happiness Equation and then you read my new book, they have different voices in them purposely. Book of Awesome is very like slapstick, and it's got like lots of like little jokes thrown in, and like it's lots of like repeating phrases, and lots of sentences begin with like yes and lots of exclamation marks. And then the new book doesn't have that at all, right? So I'm not trying to mask myself. I'm just trying to write in different voices, and I'm not even good at I'm not even like someone who writes in literary fiction that can be different people in different books. That is like, I don't know how they I don't know how they.
Yeah, that's
I'm in
amazing.
awe of that.
That's amazing. Well, you have
Right?
to adopt an entirely different worldview, in order to make a compelling character. Even if you're watching a show, I find it really fascinating. The writers, you have to completely abandon your worldview, and in order to make a compelling character, you have to get into the mind of someone who maybe you despise, and so that's really interesting to me. So the name of the book.
Oh, the actual book is like The Babysitter's Club, and it's like the Treasury one. So it's like, they all go to Disney. You want me to give you the actual title? Okay, so it's here it is. I'm gonna Google it right now for you, okay? Because it's like I have it. I literally have it on my shelf. So my sister actually recently found it in the basement. Like she had all of them, and I was like, oh, I only want the Treasury because that's what I remember the most. So I have it on my shelf. But it's like, for anyone who knows the Babysitter's Club, it's like the one where the author wrote it from everyone's perspective. Okay. And unfortunately,
there's only one of them.
Unfortunately, even
this Treasury.
Here it is. Here we go. Here it is. They were super specials, extended version of the Revolution, several members of the club. Yeah, a larger plot. So it's like, I think the one I liked was like super special number 5, and it's like they go to Disney World or whatever. And this one's like the one on Wikipedia sucks because they don't even tell you all
Yeah.
of them. I want to know the list of all of them. Clearly, no one has taken the time or taken the effort to like write them all out on Wikipedia. Anyone's listening and wants to get some Wikipedia credit, go edit the Wikipedia entry for the Babysitters Club. It is horribly gap filled.
Oh man. Okay. Cool. Well, we'll figure it out. But why was that so impactful for you? Like, what was it about that, and how did it impact your life?
Made me want to be a writer. Like it made me want to do that. It made me think that was an incredible magic trick. It made me realize that there was something special happening here, and if you could do it in the right way, you could have people pretend like the author wasn't those girls, and I wasn't, but we were both pretending to be them. That was amazing to me. Like I could not believe that we can make up entirely fake identities that could feel real, that we could wear in our minds for brief periods of time and be other people. And by the way, in chapter 6 of my podcast with Judy Bloom, like I flew down to Key West and interviewed Judy Bloom. She's 80. She runs a bookstore down there. She said to me that one of the biggest gaps right now, she's also a bookseller in addition to being Judy Bloom.
Yeah, I listened to that episode.
Is that like you probably heard this. It's like girls will read books where the boy is the primary voice. But boys will not read books where girls are the primary voice. You know, so like you remember that? So it's like if you're a grandparent, you're looking for a book for your kid, you're like, oh, what book would my little girl like? And she could say, I don't know, like Catcher in the Rye. I'm an older kid, I guess. And they're like, okay, great. You can be and they're going to read that. Holden Caulfield, your Catcher in the Rye. But if you're like, hey, what book should my son read? And if you say, I don't know, The Hate You Give, where it's a young black female protagonist, that the parent might say, well, isn't like, I don't think my grandson will like that. Like, so she was pointing out that the point though is the same one that we were talking about, which is the more diverse the viewpoint you can get, the greater your growth. You already know how to be you. What you don't know how to be is a young black woman,
right?
If you aren't one,
right?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's akin to traveling in that way, because you're exposed to different worldviews, you're exposed to different cultures, you're exposed to just like the George R.R. Martin quote. It's like the reader who what is it again? The reader who reads 1,000 books.
A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one.
There's only one, right? Yeah. That's awesome. That's very cool. Have people asked you that question, or am I the first one to ask you that question so far?
No, everyone is asking me that
question.
In fact, well, because it's like, how I think the presupposition is like, well, how can you ask other people if you So I know I might have to just like in a year from now just like start, but I'm still thinking about them. Really, I'm still like processing stuff. There's books that I'm affected by books deeply, and so the real test of a book is that how long does it stick with you? How many times do you reread it? How quickly can you tell the story of why it was important to you? Like those are tests that take time to think about. If you only had 5 books left in your life, would you keep it? Would you reread it before you died? Would you pay a percentage of your income to read it at an earlier time to affect you differently? Like these are the big questions, and so. It takes time to answer that. Like I'll read a book like East of Eden, like I did 2 years ago, and it shook me. But I don't know if in 5 years from now it will stick with me or not. Because even today, 2 years later, I have trouble remembering the whole plot. Like I'm like, what happened there? And you know when you watch a movie again, you're like, I don't remember how it ends.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So that sometimes happens with books too. You're like, you have a book on your bookshelf, you read it, you read it, and you have no idea what's in it. You cannot remember.
Oh man, yeah.
And that's that. Yeah.
That's kind of that's one of the most frustrating things I find. Actually, that's probably, I'd say, at the top of my list of problems that I have in terms of reading. And but I wonder, is it because I'm not remembering, or is it because that particular book wasn't important enough, wasn't necessary enough for me to remember it? My brain was like, we don't need that right now. Because, like, for example, well, I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Go ahead.
But what I was going to say was that, you know, like when I've had major, like real pressing problems in my life, like, or what I perceive as a pressing problem, like, for example, I had when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I had pretty bad acne, and I was trying to solve that problem. And so I would seek out information in order to solve that problem. And every single thing I would read, all the information I would consume, I would attach it to that particular problem. And so I remember, and so I studied a lot of nutrition during that time, and I remember I can tell you a lot of different things. Everything you want to know about skin nutrition, still to this day. But it was because I had like a pressing problem. I sometimes wonder if like I'm just reading to read, and then maybe I'm not retaining it because, maybe it wasn't relevant to my life in that instance.
Yeah, or you soaked it in so deeply you can't process it up there, but it exists down there. You know,
that's true. Yeah, I think Ralph Waldo Emerson has a really cool quote about that. It's like, I don't remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten, but even so, they have made me. And I really like that.
Yeah, that's a very good quote. And it's also very relieving. Good, because I don't have to.
Neil, this has been an awesome talk. I know that you have to run now, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and share your and nerd out about books with me.
Absolutely my pleasure, Ruben. It's my favorite thing to talk about, and you are an incredible person. I love what you're doing online. I love your thirst for it too, and that's really what it's all about. The part we can't teach is the curiosity, the starvingness, the hunger for it. And I love just chatting with people who have that hunger. And my hope is that by being excited about it, we can just increase the thirst for books out there, because they're not going to go anywhere. No matter how many people tell me that they sold all their books, I'm like, psh. Seth Godin told me in chapter 3 of the show, he's like, the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life was selling my books. You know what I mean? Like, don't let that haunt you. Lean into it. Okay. Sexiest thing a person can do is be sitting somewhere and reading a book.
Love that one. And your new memoir is it only an Audible original?
It's only an Audible original now. It comes out in print later.
Okay.
It comes out in print from Simon & Schuster, and right now we're saying November 2019.
Okay, very cool. And it's called How to Get Back Up, a memoir of failure and resilience. Very cool. Excited to check that out, and excited to also check out some of the other books that we've talked about on this episode. So, Neil, thanks again, and I hope we talk soon.
Thanks, Ruben. Take care.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Think Grow podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and find value in this podcast, I humbly ask you to please subscribe or leave me a review on iTunes. Or you can just share it with a friend who you think might find value in it. If you've already done any of these, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank you. I truly, truly appreciate your support. Lastly, if you have any suggestions for future guests or topics you'd like to hear covered, you can email podcast@thinkgrowprosper.org.